Hello and welcome to Leargang. It is track walk day, so we're having a nosy around the pits to try and find out what is going on. Now, after a busy couple of weeks on the World Cup, there have been less new parts of this race, admittedly, so we thought we'd do some deeper dives into certain topics. So we caught up with Troy Brosnan's mechanic to find out why he's still running the 471, which is something like a fan favourite of a rim, even if rim technology has arguably moved on a bit. We also check out the new SR Suntour damper, as well as catching up with Neko Mullaly to find out what he's doing going back to a steel front triangle and whether the sort of benefits of compliance are worth it. And finally, we talked to Kevin, who is Finar's mechanic, and tried to establish what exactly they're going for with that fine-tuned Specialized, and particularly what they're trying to get out of that Olin suspension. So we're here in the Canyon pits. We've got Troy's bike behind us, which we've been doing some prototype spy shots over the last couple of weeks. But here today, I want to talk to Aaron, who's Troy's mechanic, about the wheels. So it's been 10 years since Gwin did his infamous no tyre run, and everyone was amazed that the wheel stood up to the abuse. Wheels have changed over the years, in the years since. They maybe got a bit wider. We've also seen a lot of teams go to carbon wheels, but a lot of racers are still sticking with the 25mm internal width of the 471. What's the reasoning? Why do racers love it so much?
So basically, it has a good flex characteristic to it. It's very tunable, so we can mess around with spoke tensions. We can mess around with different type of spokes and different spoke counts, and we can basically get a wheel that, I'm not going to say it's indestructible, but it's very close to it. They're absolutely unreal. They have a tendency when they get damaged to dent in, so you don't lose any air as well. So that's incredibly beneficial for us, as well as the tire profile. Yeah.
And is that tyre profile because of the 25mm width?
Yeah, correct. So it's the tires are a little bit more round. So when they lean it over a little bit more, he just tends to not get on the edge of his tires as much. So yeah.
Why do you think that we're seeing this like discrepancy between this? What a lot of we're often told this is what we're doing because this is what the racers run. Yeah. But a lot of racers stick with narrower internal widths, and but the consumer we end up getting pushed to the almost standard 30mm now.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to talk to the marketing departments about that. I don't really know. This is obviously our tried and tested recipe. We've been doing this. Like I was actually on the team with Aaron when that rim happened. So yeah, we've been doing the same wheels for 10 years as well. We've tested a lot of other wheels. We've been with other wheel companies, but these ones are just absolutely dynamite. So yeah.
And is there anything from DT where they want you to be on the new stuff, or do they just want you on whatever makes you happy?
They just want us to be on the fastest wheels that we can be on. So, someone else like, Lucas on a 1500 rim, he doesn't necessarily get along with the 471. He doesn't like the tyre profiles. So it is definitely rider dependent. But yeah, for us, they've been the rims that we've been on, like I said, for a long time, and he loves it. And whatever tyre we put on it, he seems to gel with it really well. So yeah.
And you mentioned spoke tension there. I notice you've got the silver spokes, well, silver everything really. What was the thinking behind both spoke tension, as well as you said there's something going on that was more than just a colour choice?
Yeah, so obviously, silver looks rad. That's for one. But you can actually feel the way the spokes correlate with each other, like the rub over them. He can actually feel it. So the anodizing black, he can feel the, not like the grind, but I guess a grind more so than like the silver spokes have a tendency to glide over each other. So yeah, he's really into that, and yeah, we stick with it. So yeah.
Amazing. One last question. I know I've heard in the past that Troy's run some really low spoke tensions, and it's all about ultimate tracking more than it is about like a stiffness characteristic. Is that something you're still pursuing, and do you know what sort of tension you're running these wheels at, or is that too much of the secret sauce?
It's kind of secret sauce, to be honest. We have ran very low tensions in the past. We still do run very low tensions. It's definitely very track dependent though. So here this weekend, it's a little bit higher than we generally would say somewhere like Val d'Isole. Yeah, but it's kind of secret sauce, to be honest.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for that, and the secret sauce you're allowed to tell me. So we're here in the SR Suntour pits, and this is their new RC Plus damper, which has some notable differences compared to the old one. So first of all, it's called RC Plus. I don't really know what the plus is there for, but it's rebound and compression. This doesn't have independent high and low speed compression and rebound adjustments. It's just the one. They basically feel that through a redesigned compression and a redesigned rebound piston, they can get a better rate of oil flow and basically a better performance out of the damper by having no high speed adjustment on there. So if you wanted to change it, you would be changing those shims internally. However, for their racers, they think this is the way to go. It's also, and really importantly, seen a big revision to the architecture. And you can see this little bleed port here. Now, this is something that you will have seen in stuff like the Grip 2. They've been doing it for a few years now. What happens is when you have the oil in the lower, under extreme bottom mounts, it's pressurized and wants to force its way up through the seal, which then basically overfills the damper. You might have remembered those first generations of bladder dampers that were the Charger maybe 10 years ago, and they would sometimes explode. But how would that happen? It was bled perfectly, right? Well, that's because at some point it ingested oil from the lower. The problem is that to stop that happening, you have to do a far tighter seal, which then introduces friction and lower sensitivity. So what you want to do is essentially have a seal that doesn't sit so tight on the lower there, and can even, in extreme circumstances, ingest oil. Then, should that happen, it can just purge it out of the top of the damper there as that IFP passes. So it's a really elegant system that basically means you get a higher performance and you also get better lubricated lowers. In the old SR Suntour Rux fork, they would actually say to put no oil in the lowers at all and to just grease the seals. This is all about stopping that potentially disastrous oil ingestion. Like most high-end gravity dampers, this uses a coil-backed IFP. So an IFP is basically all about the displacement that happens and compensating for it as a damper goes through its stroke. You typically have three options. There is the bladder, like I mentioned on that first generation of Charger dampers, which is really good, but can explode. You also get the gas-backed ones, which is basically a pressurized chamber, which you typically find on your shocks. These are really good, but of course, the forces and leverage going through a shock are very different to a fork, and I imagine having that high amount of preload put on the back of that IFP, that internal floating piston, is only going to be a negative thing, because quite simply on a fork, you don't have the same leverage that you get out of a rear end of a bike to actuate on a shock. The third option is using literally a coil. Now that coil spring basically means you can have better sensitivity without having something that could potentially at some point explode, and also works really well with this purging system, which seems like all the brands are going to now. So we're here in the frameworks bit with Neko. Now, Neko, your bikes are seeing constant revisions. Every time we come, it seems there's a new frame link, there's a new shock position. This is also a bit different because we're going to, well, revisiting an idea that you explored last year. So on the left, we can see, I guess that was the previous generation steel front triangle. And on the right, we've got a brand new steel front triangle. Would that be right?
Yeah, last year I experimented with the two different materials and kind of came to a fork in the road and decided which way we were going to move forward with our frames for the ones we sold this year and the ones that the riders were going to race. And we decided to go with the aluminum ones because they were for Asa and myself, like for racing, they were stiffer and they gave us the feedback we wanted out of the bike. And we could do more with design with aluminum. You can do more with CNC stuff, offer more adjustability with like reaches and stuff without paying a weight penalty. But I've spent a lot of nights laying in bed wondering if I could have done the steel one better. Like we did two versions of the steel, improved on it the second time. And I still wondered if we could have captured some of the benefits of it, with minimizing the places where it was just too flexy and heavy. And that's basically what this bike is. It's like putting some thought into it and trying to go back to the steel and see if we can do it better.
And so what does the steel give you then? Is it a comfort thing? Is it a vibration damping? What's the...
Yeah, basically it's both of those. It's a more dead feel on the trail. I guess basically put steel's a lot stronger material, so you can use less of it. And when you use less of it, it allows the bike to flex more and be more compliant. And you can fine tune the areas where it does that.
And it's so, I think for people at home, they might be thinking, would they be able to detect it? But for me, steel bikes have such a different feel. It's like saying, it's like picking up the difference between like a different suspension layout. Like it's really apparent when you get on the bike. And like I said, that dullness they give to the trail. With the other bike, in terms of, I actually was lucky enough to spend a bit of time on it. It felt like it was a very, quite a stiff front end. I imagine for when you're pushing as hard as you guys do, that was very precise at those speeds. Is there any risk with the more compliant bike that you're starting to maybe lose track of where the front axle is? You lose it in the noise of, or is the fact that it can flex a bit mean the relationship between your hands, feet, and front axle is more consistent?
There definitely is some negatives to it flexing too much, especially for like Asa. We pretty much let him make the final word on it. And I think very humbly, in his own words, he said his dad would really like that bike. So for a pro racer, like, you want the bike to be precise. It doesn't need to be the most comfortable as long as it's really predictable. If it does flex too much, either at the head tube or the BB, you can go too far with the flex and then it kicks you out weird. Like, you could get the bike to wind up in a turn and deflect you out, not how you were expecting. So it's a pros and cons of that when you're trying to tune the stiffness of the frame.
And we've seen on this bike here, it's got quite a lot of gussets. It's got a lot of reinforcement. Also, I notice it's going to a straight gauge 1/1/8 head tube. Is that a weight reduction thing? Is that just because you know exactly what geometry you want, so you can just leave it as such?
It's strictly weight reduction. I'd say where I got to with the last frame was that it was too flexy and too heavy. So how do you make the frame stiffer and lighter? It's kind of a challenge. And not having the adjustable headset was able to save a lot of weight. That head tube is pretty heavy piece. It's a thick wall, and to go from a 56 mil head tube down to a 44 is saving you a lot of weight.
And one last point, we noticed on this bike you've got that big CNC rocker. You've got that carbon rear end. Is there a danger that the inputs from that rear end could, it's like a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, but flex often finds a way. Is it a case of that you could go so stiff on the rear that actually it sort of wants to flex around that seat tube junction?
Yes, I would say the bike flex, you feel axle to axle. So if one point, like you said, is stiffer than another, it's going to go to the point of least resistance and flex there first. But I wouldn't say that it's only at those pivot points. One thing we did with this frame is made a lot bigger down tube. So we went to a 44 mil down tube from a 38.1 down tube. And we 3D printed the bend in the down tube. So it's not a bent tube. When you bend a tube, you weaken it and make it flex more. So increasing the down tube stiffness increases the total stiffness a lot, both at the head tube and the BB. So I think we've found a way, and the tube's also butted now too. So it's bigger cross section and it's thinner. So it should be stiffer and lighter, which is, I guess, what we were looking for out of this bike.
And one last question. When you started this frameworks project, it seems that to get to the stage you are now where you're really talking about some of the kind of granular stuff, the sort of, I know the final touches, like, the compliance, the flex, the comfort. Does that mean, are you a bit more settled on what you want the geometry figures to be if we're at this place now where we're looking at frame materials a bit more in depth?
I am myself. I think having a little bit of adjustment for the riders is nice. Like on our production bikes, we offer 9 mil of headset adjustment. So you can go plus or minus 9, which gets you kind of right in the sweet spot. We offer different size bikes. So if you're like medium, you can go plus 9. If you're large, you can go minus 9. Kind of get right where you want it. As far as the BB height and things like that, I think DH bikes are pretty settled. Like if you look across the range, there's not too much variance there. But what's interesting, having other riders on the team now, like Angel, for example, his preferences are different to mine and Asa's. The past 2 bikes he came off of were a lot different feel. And it's a balance of the geo and the kinematics. It's like where he's sitting in the travel relation to the geo affects his feel on the bike. So it's been a pretty cool process to get inside his head, find out what he's looking for, and give him a setup that he's happy with. In the beginning, I tried to explain to him, this is why I designed the bike this way. This is why it's supposed to work this way. And I realized that wasn't the right attitude. I, instead of that, asked him what he needs to race his best and then try to work from there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for your time. I'm super curious to maybe touch back in Val de Sol, hear more about this steel front triangle, and see how it fared up in a race run.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks.
So we're here with Kevin Joly, who is Finn's mechanic. I just want to ask some questions about, I suppose, the place that Specialized have arrived at in terms of their suspension setup. In broad strokes, in broad terms, what are you going for? And what does the perfect suspension setup look like?
Well, it's a big question because every race obviously are different. So my goal is to try to reach the best of what we have, like matching Finn's, how Finn is riding and how much he improve every winter. And so every winter we work hard to make adjustment to try to work on some other windows to see if they're good or not. And step by step we reach our goals. So bike is different than last year for many reasons, and obviously the setting is they're always kind of on the same target because Finn is a really aggressive rider, so it means that it's loading the suspension a lot and it's fast, so we need to support that. So it's just a matter of how fast he's going to support what the pressure he put into the bike. So
It looks like compared to some other brands or some other teams, the chassis of your bikes is very stable, and it looks oftentimes
it's not like
it's not seesawing. It's quite neutral, and it looks a lot of time that the suspension, particularly the forks, is very happy to go into its stroke, maybe deeper than people would think.
I don't know. To be honest, I'm really focused on what I'm doing. I'm not really watching what the other do because I won't say it won't help me, but Finn is so specific, so I just focus on my stuff. I feel that we have a good overall setup. We've been working a lot with Olins to have what we need, and I feel if you say that it's looking like this, so it means we did a good work.
And when we think about sag or dynamic sag, do you try and keep it equal front and back, and do you have an idea of the number?
No, it's always different because I look at it a little bit, but I'm not into it too much because there is so many where it doesn't really mean anything. For me, I'm more pointing when the suspension need to be at a certain part of the track, you know, because you can have a 10% average, but it can be 5, 5, 5 and 15, 15 and for 10 overall. So it's like at classes, you know. You can have 5 in math, 5 in French, and 15 in geo, and 15 in biology, and you have 10 overall. So it's, you know, we need to have the correct number on a perfect spot into the track. So I'm digging more into speed shaft and stuff like this.
And do you have a particular shaft speed that you have in mind, or again, does it vary on track to track?
Well, it really depends the track, the condition, and but I have a lot of. We've been testing a lot with Finn, so I have a big book with all the numbers. So year after year, I got more and more, and I am all the numbers from a long time ago. So, but he's improving every year, so he's reaching another level every year. So I just need to adapt the bike for himself and for the condition, for the moment. So there's nothing like this, and it works every time. So it's always different.
And if a random normal rider who just likes to ride at the weekend and more of a casual user got on Finn's or Loic's bike, do you think it would be softer or harder than they expected? And in terms of rebound, do you think it'd be fast?
If I ride the bike as the same setting with Finn, oh, good luck, man. I try. I'm not a good rider, but I try. It's unrideable.
Just really hard, or
Like, it's super hard. You cannot like get grip, or it's like, I mean, it's another game, you know. You need to push. That's why also it's hard for me. It's to follow. That's how I do with Finn. Is like following him through the weekend, and don't. I track walk. I have an idea of my final setup, mud or dry, but I'm building it, and I cannot go straight to it, you know. So because you need to be confident, then we need a little click to go for quali and a little extra. So I'm building it all the way. So, and because our bike is super hard to set up, that's why we need a setup for the beginning, and then we grow to get like we get more speed. So speed means more forces into the bike. So we try to adapt as much as we can. That's why the data is super important for me. And the guy from BYB did a special thing for me on the software, so I can have more information, like more actually stuff that I really need to. So which is perfect. And step by step we reach the speed, then we reach another target, and at the end we try to, and for final we try to make the best of it and hope for a good result. But yeah.
And in terms of last question on rebound speed, sometimes to have a softer spring and do more in the damper, you have to have rebound quite quickly to get the travel. Do you
That's
want?
definitely not his kind of riding. Like I've tried because I'm curious, but that's definitely not. He need a lot of support because he's a big guy. He's pushing really hard on corners and everything. He's using the ground a lot to carry and generate spin. So that's not working for him.
So the fast rebound isn't necessarily what he goes for.
Definitely not. No.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for your time.